It's another big day for Donald Trump's criminal election interference trial here in New York, starting out with both sides butting heads over Trump's gag order. The prosecution asking for Trump to be held in contempt of court for his attacks on witnesses and jurors, while Trump's lawyer attempting to spin those attacks as purely political. The judge, visibly frustrated, admonishing Trump's attorney Todd Blanche, saying, quote, "You're losing all credibility with this court." Growing heated, the judge adding, quote, "You've presented nothing." Wow. Well, we'll have more on that later in the show. But first, the prosecution's first witness back on the stand, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, returning to detail to the jury his involvement in the multiple catch-and-kill plots to very negative stories about Donald Trump. Pecker detailing his decades-long relationship with Trump and his frequent communications with Michael Cohen. Testifying that in that now infamous 2015 meeting, Pecker agreed to publish only, quote, positive stories about Trump, promising to be Trump's, quote, eyes and ears. Pecker going on to tell the jury how, at the time, he told the National Enquirer leadership he wanted that agreement to be, quote, as quiet as possible, because they were going to try to help the Trump campaign. This is a big deal. The prosecution alleging a conspiracy to help Trump's campaign in order to influence the outcome of the presidential election, setting out to prove that Trump violated New York State election law. At one point, David Pecker admitting that he bought a false story about Trump fathering a child out of wedlock because of the potential embarrassment to the campaign and Mr. Trump. The prosecution turned to the hush money payment to Karen McDougal, a model who says that she had an affair with Trump. Pecker recalled during this time, Cohen instructed him to use the messaging app Signal instead of regular phones because it's encrypted and messages would be destroyed. And the DA has evidence that Trump knew. Trump knew all about this. A recording by Cohen discussing the McDougal payment through David Pecker.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David. I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So no.
Court will resume on Thursday with more testimony from David Pecker. But joining us now is Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney, Maya Wiley, former civil attorney in the Southern District of New York, and Hugo Lowell, reporter with The Guardian covering Washington and all things Donald Trump. Joyce, I want to start with you. You and I have talked often about trying cases. And when you have your case in chief, that primacy and recency is how you do this. You start strong and you end strong when it comes to the presentation through witnesses. Was it smart for the prosecution to start with David Pecker thus far?
Well, it was smart, Katie, and I am reminded that it was you who first said that you thought David Pecker would be a great kickoff witness. I think that's the case, right? This is someone who doesn't have the baggage of a Michael Cohen and who tells the origin story. He has now walked us through the election interference conspiracy. This is now catch and kill to elect Trump. That's the case that the prosecution will put on. They've done a great job of giving the jury sort of the basics, the landmarks and the roadmap that they'll move ahead on through Mr. Pecker's testimony.
You know, Maya, we learned today very clearly from the prosecution, and it actually came through two ways. One, through the testimony of David Pecker about the conspiracy with Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, but also through some oral arguments that took place in front of Juan Merchan outside the presence of the jury. And it's the prosecution is eyeing a specific New York State election law. And to quote it, conspiracies to promote the election of a specific candidate through unlawful means. How powerful has it been that we've only had David Pecker on the stand for a couple of hours and we're actually hearing him nail the elements of that particular statute?
Pretty powerful, because he has nailed the particular elements of that statute, as you just said, Katie. I mean, look, you have the person who is in the room where it happened in August of 2015 saying Cohen said the boss wants to see you. That puts Trump directly in the frame as directing, right? We know that's one of the things we expect to hear from Michael Cohen. But directing what? And what very clearly unfolds in David Pecker's testimony is, we didn't do catch and kills before 2015, which is not illegal. Catch and kills are not illegal. Yeah. They didn't do it before 2015.
Some of them are not illegal.
He sees a business interest for himself and a benefit to the campaign if he writes positive stories about Donald Trump as a candidate and negative stories about other candidates, and that evolves, and he starts laying out the picture. And they also provide all of the headlines coming from National Enquirer, positive for Trump, but negative for other candidates. But as these allegations start to arise that people have stories like Dino the doorman and Karen McDougal, all of it becomes this thing to help the campaign by ensuring these stories don't come out. But that's the key point, to help Donald Trump's campaign, and it comes out in different ways over and over and over again. And if you're a member of that jury, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking that jury's thinking, oh, well, this is a pretty clear, now he hasn't been cross-examined yet, but I get the story here. I'm getting the story pretty clearly.
And it kind of makes you wonder how much was before 2015, by the way, because that's when the story picks up. But you can only imagine, because they had a friendship for decades that went back decades. Hugh, I wanted to, we started the show talking about what I call bench slap. I said Todd Blanche got bench slapped by Juan Merchan during the gag order contempt hearing at the beginning of today's proceedings. But I wanted to ask you about how that affects Donald Trump's relationship with his lawyers, right? Because Trump doesn't get up unless he takes the stand to testify in his own defense. He has to rely upon people like Todd Blanche and Emil Bove and Susan Necheles to be able to be his advocates in court. What is it like? Because you not only witnessed it this morning, you felt the energy, but to see somebody like Todd Blanche be smacked down by Judge Juan Merchan in that way.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it's problematic for Todd in multiple respects, because to date, Trump has only seen Todd win. Todd has been actually very selective in the cases where he's gotten up to the podium and gone before the judge. It's really the classified documents case where they have a judge, in effect, pulling in their favor, and Todd has won every single time. Yesterday and today are the first two times that Todd has lost. Today, it was really visceral. I mean, for the judge to tell a defense lawyer you're losing all credibility with the court, you don't have to be a lawyer to know that that's bad. And when you're the client and you're the defendant in a criminal trial and your lawyer is getting admonished like that, I have to imagine that it starts to affect the relationship between Trump and Todd Blanche. And the one thing that was really interesting was after that colloquy ended and Todd went to sit back down, he was trying really hard to be jovial with Trump. He was trying really hard to be chit-chatty. And this is the Todd that you normally see, but it seemed a little forced. And I wonder if the number of days that Todd is going to be in the inner sanctum and best friends with Trump might be coming to an end if he loses this trial.
Yeah, and for our viewers, when Todd was arguing with Judge Merchan, Donald Trump didn't once turn in his chair to watch his lawyer. Donald Trump sat impassive, bored-looking, ahead. Joyce, that's actually a really kind of important thing I want to talk to you about, because the fireworks between Merchan and Todd Blanche were not witnessed by the jury. All of this took place outside the presence of the jury before the jury returned at 11. But David Pecker is on the stand, and one of the things that was developed by the prosecution thus far is something that Maya and I just talked about, which is the length of time of that friendship. And it was a friendship. It was not just a business relationship that was, quote, mutually beneficial. It was a friendship that went on for decades. Does that in and of itself, and again, to Maya's point, no cross yet, but does that provide, do you think, almost a boosting of the credibility that Pecker is under subpoena and he has to testify?
Absolutely it does, right? This is one of Donald Trump's longtime friends. That's what he testified to. He said that they talked usually once a month or a couple of times a quarter, so maybe not best friends, but good friends. And Katie, you know, what's interesting, we don't know the full story yet, but it'll be very interesting if they had had this close relationship for years and the catch and kill evolves only in its current form once Trump is a candidate for the presidency. Because something that the prosecution has to drive home here is that this is always about electing Donald Trump. You know, cross-examination is always a little bit of a wild card with a witness like Pecker. It's very difficult to know how that will go. But I want to go back to Hugo's point, which I think is a very good one about the interaction that Judge Marchand was having with Todd Blanche, Trump's lawyer, because something that Blanche is very likely to tell Trump tonight, and you know, few people talk to Trump like this, is that what happened in the courtroom today was the result of Trump's own behavior. Blanche was trying to defend the indefensible, Trump's clear violation of the gag order. And although the judge certainly, as you said, bench slapped Todd Blanche, some of it, there may be an element here of giving Blanche a little bit of leverage to go back to his client and to regain some client control. Because the judge knows that if he sends Trump off to a little bit of time in jail, even if it's a Sunday or a weekend, that really does let Trump cloak himself with martyrdom. But if Blanche can get back some control, if they can convince Trump to go ahead and quit violating the gag order so that witnesses and jurors are protected, that's probably a better option in the judge's view.
All I did is point out the fact that on the cover of the National Enquirer, there was a picture of him and crazy Lee Harvey Oswald having breakfast. Now, Ted never denied that it was his father. Instead, he said, Donald Trump, I had nothing to do with it.
And that was Donald Trump back in 2016, denying his involvement in this magazine cover, the National Enquirer, falsely alleging Ted Cruz's father was linked to JFK's assassination. Remember, Cruz and Trump, they were competing for the GOP presidential nomination at that time. And today, David Pecker, the CEO of the National Enquirer's publisher, American Media, Inc., giving bombshell testimony at Trump's criminal trial, admitting that that story was completely manufactured, including a fake photo. Pecker saying, quote, we mashed the photos and the different picture with Lee Harvey Oswald. That's how that story was prepared. Well, created, I would say. And it was all done at the direction of Trump's lawyer at the time, Michael Cohen. Pecker testifying, quote, after the Republican debates and based on the success that some of the other candidates had, I would receive a call from Michael Cohen, and he would direct me and direct Dylan Howard which candidate and which direction we should go. That's how the process happened. Cruz today denying comment, telling NBC News that he's, quote, not interested in revisiting ancient history. Pecker detailing a mutually beneficial agreement between Trump and the tabloid magazine. Pecker admitted when he promoted Trump with positive coverage like this, what you're seeing right now, it actually helped both his magazine sales and it helped Trump. But when prosecutors asked if buying up negative stories of Trump helped the magazine, Pecker said, quote, no, that didn't help. It benefited the campaign. And by that, he means the Trump campaign. Pecker testified about the catch and kill scheme involving ex-Playboy model Karen McDougal, who is a prosecution witness. When McDougal first approached the National Enquirer, Pecker told Trump he should buy the story. Trump told him, quote, anytime you do something like that, it always comes out. And of course now, those words coming back to haunt Donald Trump. Joining me now is Lachlan Cartwright, former executive editor with American Media, Inc., the National Enquirer's parent company, and Maya Wiley is back with me. Lachlan, it's great to have you here. Talk about what it's like to see David Pecker on the stand. I want to get your honest assessment of how you think he's doing on the stand.
It's truly surreal.
Yeah.
Up until yesterday, I hadn't seen David Pecker since I left American Media, which was in the summer of 2017. He's aged. He is moving incredibly slowly. And bearing in mind, this was someone who created an incredibly toxic newsroom, which was governed by fear on sales figures. And, he was known to scream and shout. I saw him in the courtroom laughing yesterday. Having said that, he is doing, I think, an incredible job of really talking the jury through in very forensic detail now as to how this election interference occurred, dating back to that meeting, that key meeting in August of 2015, where he is with Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, and says, "I'll be the eyes and ears of the campaign, and we'll run negative stories about your rivals, while also, catching and killing stories and taking stories off the market about that would be negative to the campaign."
So let's be clear. What you've heard so far from David Pecker in terms of how this catch and kill scheme happened, specifically at the Inquirer, is accurate thus far. Is that correct?
It is. It is. There are a few sort of small details he's off on, which you can put down to the years that have gone by. For instance, he said today that the Dorman story was brought to him by Dylan Howard via a source. It actually came via our tip line. But everything he is saying is tallying with my knowledge from the time.
And he talked about checkbook journalism yesterday, which is the first time I've ever heard that phrase, the idea that you're paying, well, it's not just you're paying for the source, but there was like a limit on how much you could buy for the source and all this other stuff. But we heard today, too, that these non-disclosure agreements or these source documents that were being signed, that they were amended for somebody like Dino Sajudin, Dino the doorman, to make it in perpetuity for the exclusivity, et cetera. I mean, these things were decisions that somebody like David Pecker made, right? I mean, this is where the buck stopped at the Inquirer, right?
That was another absolutely surreal moment where they put up the Dino the doorman contract so the jury could see. That contract sat in a safe. That safe was in my office, which I use as a footrest. And a moment came where I had to open that safe because I was helping the Wall Street Journal after they broke the Karen McDougal story, and the reporter asked about other such incidents that were going on. And I told him about the Dino the doorman catch and kill, and he was trying to track down the names of both the love child, who was actually calling the love adult at that time because of her age, and also the woman. So I had to get the contract out of this rusty old safe and then signaled him, the same app that David Pecker was referring to, how he communicated with Michael Cohen, the encrypted messaging app. I signaled the names to Lucas Elpert of the Wall Street Journal, went to put the contract back in the safe and tried to close the safe, and the door wouldn't close. And I was panicking. I thought at any moment Dylan Howard could come in to my office and see the safe open. And so I had to turn the TV up on my office, and I was there hammering the safe, and it finally shut. But it was an absolutely terrifying moment. So to see that contract up on the TV today in the courtroom was just one of those moments where I'm like, I'm going through this trip down a very dark memory lane, but it also has these comical, almost Coen brother type moments that I just sit there and I'm just like, wow, I can't believe I lived through all of this.
I see a Netflix movie. Okay, so Maya, I find that to be amazing and humorous and kind of wild, but I want to talk about, though, how outrageous it is, though, the testimony today, though, that it was just common and okay to make these false stories up and to put them up for these negative headlines and to generate fake news, literally fake news. But it was, to Lachlan's point, it started in 2015. That was the first time that they had ever paid to take a negative story about Donald Trump. How important is it for the jury to understand that that was that pivotal moment when the rubber met the road, I guess?
When we heard in opening statements from the people, Manhattan District Attorney's Office, that this was a case about a conspiracy, an agreement, that room in August of 2015, where you get more than one person, you have to have at least two. They're not charged with conspiracy per se, but this is what their theory of the case and what they have to show. This agreement was very much to ensure that the campaign was successful over and over again. And the fact that this didn't happen before is exactly the kind of, to me, and I think you said this on social media too, Katie, that that was the brass ring. That was the brass ring, because that's the thing that said to the jury, don't think this is just not hush money payments are not illegal. So that's not the story here on crime and criming. It's the fact that this never happened before that tells you there was something unusual about this agreement that the rest starts to prove as they show that including David Pecker. That's what you put up. It's just so important that David Pecker's saying, no, actually, this didn't help us as a business. Like, it's one thing to say it helps us as a business because we get more sales if we help Donald Trump, the candidate. That's not illegal. But that we're now doing something that does not help us. We are doing it to help the campaign, and that is the agreement we made that started in August of 2015. That is stunning.